Don't touch it. You, who cleans things, know what a piano is. That piano's worth more than your yearly sala. That's what he said. In front of everyone. With the spotlight warming his arrogant face and the Steinway grand gleaming like a throne. She wasn't a guest. Not a performer. Just the girl with the mop and the name tag they never bothered to pronounce correctly. But what none of them knew, was that the girl they just humiliated. She used to own stages like this. Before the world stripped her of everything but her silence. Until tonight. Because when Zoe sat at that piano, the world didn't just hear music, it heard resistance. And the boy who thought he was untouchable. He played second to the girl they tried to erase, and what happened next? It shattered every rule, every label, every expectation. You think you've seen a twist? You haven't seen this one. Stay with us because in the next 60 seconds, everything changes. The chandeliers sparkled like constellations above the marble lobby of the Wellington Grand Theatre, a historic concert hall nestled in the heart of New York City's Upper West Side. Everything about the place whispered elegance: the velvet ropes, the gold leaf balconies, the hushed tones of old money. Tonight, it would host the Winter Crescendo Gala, an invitation-only event reserved for the city's elite bankers, diplomats, old money families, and headline artists. The air already hummed with expectation. But deep in the shadows of that splendor, beneath the grandeur and behind the curtains, someone else moved silent, unnoticed. Zoe Williams, 19 years old, dressed in a janitor's gray uniform, quietly swept dust from the edges of the mahogany stage. Her rubber-soled sneakers made no sound as she worked, and her name tag, plastic, chipped, and barely clinging to her chest, read, Z. Willems, the I, long faded away. No one knew her here. No one looked her in the eye. She was background, a blur in the corner of $1 million performance. But Zoe had once been something else entirely. Years ago, she was known as Little Mozart from Harlem. A black girl with natural curls, tiny fingers, and a mind that danced with symphonies. She'd learned to play on a dusty, half-broken upright piano in her grandmother's living room. By age 7, she could play Rachmaninoff. By 9, she was performing solo recitals. By 10, she had won first place in a statewide competition, beating out students from the very best private conservatories in Manhattan. The press had swarmed, "She's a miracle. The next Alicia Keys on Beethoven's piano." And then, the silence came. It didn't start with a scandal. Or failure. It started with a phone call. Her father, Marcus Williams, had fallen 2 stories at a construction site in the Bronx. No insurance. No legal safety net. 2 surgeries. Weeks in intensive care. The piano lessons were the first to go. Then the competitions. Then the piano itself sold for less than it's worth to pay for medication and rent. By the time Zoe turned 14, music had become a ghost. By 16, it was buried. Her mother, overwhelmed, took double shifts as a night nurse. Zoe worked part-time jobs and gave up her spot at a prestigious music summer program. The scholarship had been partial. The rest? Her family simply couldn't afford to believe in fairy tales anymore. When she finally dropped out of community college at 18, Zoe applied for a custodial position at the very theater where she once dreamed of performing. And so here she was. 19. Invisible. Dusting the stage of the Wellington Grand, where her name should have been printed in gold on a glossy program. But Zoe still carried her dream like a scar, faded but deep. She came early every shift, not to socialize or slack off, but for one quiet moment. Just one. To see the piano. It stood at center stage like a monument, a gleaming Steinway and Sons concert grand, polished to a mirror shine. Its black lacquer surface reflected the golden spotlights above. For Zoe, it wasn't just an instrument. It was a relic of who she used to be. Every evening before anyone else arrived, Zoe would finish her checklist early, then tiptoe to the edge of the stage, close enough to see the keys, never quite close enough to touch. She would stare at it for just a minute or two, standing perfectly still as if waiting for it to speak. She remembered the feel of real ivory beneath her fingers. She remembered the way her hands used to move not just to hit notes, but to tell stories, to pour out what words could never say. But she hadn't played in nearly 3 years. Her fingers had grown stiff from labor, not music. She still hummed melodies while she mopped, but that wasn't the same. Tonight, though, something was different. The energy in the theater was electric. Technicians were installing fresh stage lighting. Security stood outside in tailored suits with earpieces. Giant floral arrangements were being rolled in for the gala. And in the center of it all, front and elevated on the platform, was the Steinway. It called to her like it always did. But this time, Zoe didn't resist. The theater was empty. She knew the schedule, rehearsal hadn't started yet, and the featured performer, some rich piano prodigy flown in from Boston, wasn't expected for another hour. She looked left. Then right. Then slowly, step by step, she approached the piano. Her shoes made no sound on the wood floor. She wasn't going to play. She just wanted to be near it. Zoe stopped when she reached the side. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded like a drumline. One hand rose. She hovered her fingers over the keys just above the middle octave. Not touching. Just imagining. Imagining the sound. Imagining what might have been. A quiet ache filled her chest. Then, she let her hand fall gently onto the cool surface of the lid. Not the keys. Not the heart. Just the outer shell. And even that touch made her eyes sting with memory. For just a second, Zoe forgot she was a janitor. She forgot the mop closet and the paycheck-to-paycheck nights. She was Zoe Williams again, child prodigy, stage darling, future star. Then the heavy doors creaked open at the back of the auditorium. Zoe jumped back instinctively. Someone was entering. She quickly pulled out her rag and pretended to polish the edge of the piano, trying to make herself invisible again. It had always worked before. But this time, it didn't. A voice echoed across the empty hall. Cool, confident, and vaguely amused. You planning to play that thing, or clean it to death? Zoe turned around. There, under the gold-framed arch of the entrance, stood a tall young man with perfectly styled hair, a navy blue designer coat draped over his shoulders, and a smirk that could cut glass. Lucas Belmont. The name echoed in her head before she even registered his face. He was the guest performer of the night. A media darling. The jazz classical crossover king. He had been on the cover of Virtuoso Weekly, modeled for Calvin Klein's Modern Musician line, and performed in Paris, Tokyo, and Prague before the age of 20. Zoe froze. I wasn't going to play, she said quietly, stepping back. Lucas walked slowly toward the piano, hands in his pockets, looking her up and down. You work here? She nodded. He chuckled. Funny. You looked like you were trying to relive a dream. Zoe didn't answer. She felt her cheeks flush. But something inside her, something that hadn't spoken in years, rose up. She met his gaze. What if I was? Lucas blinked. Then grinned. Well, I hope your dreams include polishing pedals, because this baby doesn't play herself. He tapped the piano lid with the back of his knuckle. Then leaned closer to her. You ever actually play one of these? Zoe hesitated. Then said firmly, yes. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Really? Where? Church basement. Zoe's jaw clenched, but she didn't respond. Lucas was already walking toward his gear on the side of the stage, completely unfazed. But that moment lingered. Something had shifted. Zoe didn't know it yet, but tonight everything would change. Not because she planned it. But because fate has a funny way of reawakening forgotten dreams, especially when you least expect it. The sky over Manhattan had darkened into a velvet navy by the time the first guests began arriving in sleek black SUVs and town cars. Camera flashes sparkled like starlight outside the Wellington Grand Theater's entrance. Red carpet attendants in tuxedos guided Manhattan's elite up the staircase with the polished efficiency of a luxury auction. Inside, everything shimmered: champagne trays, crystal chandeliers, gold-plated seat tags. Tonight wasn't just a concert. It was an event. The Winter Crescendo Gala wasn't open to the public. It was sponsored by an exclusive list of patrons: old money families, tech entrepreneurs, hedge fund giants. The tickets weren't sold, they were granted. Proceeds were slated for music education programs in underserved neighborhoods, although most attendees came for the prestige and the performance. The star of the evening was none other than Lucas Belmont, 20 years old, already a household name in the world of classical crossover. Dubbed the Piano Prince of Manhattan, Lucas was the golden boy child of power, sculpted jawline, and a jaw-dropping resume. Juilliard graduate at 17. Signed with Horizon Records by 18. 2 sold-out European tours before he could legally drink champagne at his own galas. He was brilliance in a tailored suit. And he knew it. While waiters circulated with truffle canapes and string quartets played background scores in the lobby, Lucas stood alone on stage, fingers flexing over the Steinway's keys like a boxer loosening up before a title fight. He wasn't playing anything yet, just feeling the instrument. Warming his hands. Letting the anticipation build. The hall was still empty, guests hadn't been ushered in, and the spotlight operator was adjusting hues from the back row. But Lucas wasn't alone. At the far corner of the stage, almost invisible in the shadow of the velvet curtain, someone moved. Zoe. She hadn't meant to draw attention. After their earlier exchange, she'd returned backstage to finish wiping down the brass banisters, but the pull of the piano had lured her again, like gravity. And for a moment, she stepped too close. Lucas saw her. His expression changed instantly. His fingers paused above the keys. Then came the voice, sharp, cold, and condescending. "Don't touch it." Zoe froze mid-step. Her hand, once again, had lifted toward the piano without her realizing it. "Step away," Lucas said, louder now. "That's not a prop. That's a $120,000 concert grand. You don't just breathe on it." Zoe lowered her hand. But she didn't step back. Lucas stood slowly, rising from the bench. His eyes scanned her: the uniform, the scuffed sneakers, the tired badge. "You work here, right? Janitorial staff?" Zoe nodded once, cautiously. Lucas smirked. "Then maybe you should stick to your job and stay away from things you don't understand." The words hung in the air like an insult dressed in silk. Zoe's fists clenched at her sides. But her face remained calm. "I do understand," she said quietly. Lucas blinked. "Excuse me?" "The piano. I know what it is. And what it means." He tilted his head, mock intrigued. "Oh really? Enlighten me. What does a piano mean to someone who wipes stage floors?" Zoe's chest tightened. But her voice didn't shake. "It means everything. It was my first language. My only friend when I had none. It gave me a voice before I could find the words." Lucas stared at her, visibly thrown off by the poetic weight in her tone. His smirk faded just a hair. Then, laughter erupted behind them. 3 people walked on stage, Lucas's inner circle of trust fund prodigies. One of them, Derek Langston, was the son of a publishing tycoon. The second, Nico Barnes, had modeled in Milan while composing electronic jazz, for fun. The third, Sienna Hartley, a violinist and heiress, strolled in holding a flute of sparkling rose. Derek snorted, nudging Nico. "Looks like Lucas is being challenged by the help." Sienna sipped her drink and raised an eyebrow. Did she seriously just say the piano gave her a voice? That's adorable. Zoe stood her ground, even as her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Lucas shrugged. She says she knows how to play. Nico grinned wide. Oh man, let her prove it then. This could be amazing. I love a good underdog moment. Or a train wreck, Derek added. Either way, we win, Sienna chimed in. Lucas turned back to Zoe, you heard them. Go ahead. Sit down. Play something. Let's see this voice of yours. Zoe's heart pounded. Her body screamed to retreat. To disappear. But something inside her, something buried under years of silence, rose up like thunder. She stepped forward. Lucas raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised now. She sat down on the bench. Not like a guest. Not like a joke. Like a musician. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a breath. 2. 3. Then she played. It wasn't Bach or Debussy. It was something older than that. Something personal. The notes rose soft and hesitant at first, then gained strength like wind finding its wings. She was no longer on a stage. She was back in her grandmother's apartment in Harlem, late at night, the window open, moonlight spilling across sheet music. She was 9 years old again, playing her first original melody, terrified and radiant all at once. Her fingers moved like they remembered what her life had forgotten. The snickering behind her stopped. Lucas stood still. Derek's jaw slackened. Sienna's glass tilted slightly in her hand. The piece was just under 2 minutes. But it felt like an hour and a lifetime in the making. When the final note faded, Zoe lifted her hands from the keys and stood. Silence. Real silence. Then Derek muttered, half to himself, "Holy, damn." Lucas didn't speak. Zoe looked at him. "I don't need to prove anything to you," she said. "But don't ever assume someone's value by what they wear, or clean." She turned to walk away. Lucas's voice stopped her. "Wait." She paused. He stepped forward, this time slower, quieter. "Play with me." Zoe turned, confused. "What?" "Duet. My piece. It's called Fracture and Flow. I composed it for this night. If you're serious about what you just played, then show me you can follow." A hush fell again. Sienna whispered, "Is he serious?" Nico nodded, whispering back, "He's never asked anyone to duet. Ever." Zoe hesitated. Everything in her life told her to say no. That this wasn't her world. That she should back away and stay in the shadows where it's safe. But her soul leaned forward. "Fine," she said, walking back to the bench. "But don't expect me to follow. I lead just fine on my own." Lucas smiled. Not a smirk. Not mockery. A real smile. "We'll see." They sat. And when their fingers touched the keys, the theater trembled. The atmosphere inside the Wellington Grand Theater shifted subtly, but unmistakably. From hushed anticipation to something more charged. More unpredictable. Lucas Belmont, the golden boy of the night, stood with arms folded, a sly glimmer in his eye. Zoe Williams, clad in a janitor's uniform, stood just across from him, facing the grand piano like it was both a battlefield and a memory. From the side of the stage, Lucas's inner circle closed in. Derek, Nico, and Sienna moved like a well-oiled machine, perfect teeth, perfect clothes, perfect confidence. They came from families with foundations, with buildings named after them, with childhoods that included horseback lessons and Parisian summers. To them, Zoe was a glitch. A mistake in the symmetry of their world. And they found that hilarious. Derek burst out laughing. "Lucas, man, let her play. I bet she's got some killer chopsticks lined up." Nico added with a wink, "Or maybe Twinkle Twinkle, but in E minor. Dark, edgy janitor vibes." Sienna raised her flute of rose and smirked. Come on, darling. Be a gentleman. Let the help entertain us. Tell you what, she added, tapping Zoe's shoulder with the end of her flute. You should totally play something. Just one note. For the drama of it all. Who knows? You might go viral as the maid who mashed a Steinway. The others laughed. It echoed across the stage like clinking wine glasses. Lucas, arms still folded, didn't stop them. Nico snapped his fingers. Wait. Let's challenge her. Like, a little improv duel. You versus Lucas. Winner gets the piano, loser cleans it. Another burst of laughter. Even Lucas gave a half smile at that. But Zoe? She didn't flinch. Lucas turned back to Zoe, raising his hands in mock surrender. They make a compelling case. You want to try? You and me. Right here. Right now. Zoe said nothing. The laughter echoed around her. But she didn't flinch. Not this time. She stepped toward the Steinway. The moment her fingers brushed the edge of the polished wood, the room shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No wind or music swell. Just, a stillness. Like time waiting to see what she would do. Lucas tilted his head, watching her every move like a hawk waiting for its prey to stumble. Zoe pulled the bench out slowly. Its legs scraped softly against the hardwood floor. All right, she said finally. Let's play. Derek clapped his hands once, delighted. This is gonna be so good. We should live stream this to Juilliard tag at Janitor's Got Talent. Zoe didn't look at him. She sat down. The weight of the moment sat with her. She hadn't touched a piano, really touched one in nearly 3 years. Her hands were no longer as agile. Her muscles, used to gripping mops and hauling trash bags, weren't tuned for delicate keys. Her confidence, that was the biggest gap. But something inside her older than doubt took control. Lucas cracked his knuckles. I'll take the right hand. You follow on the left. Try to keep up. Zoe looked at the keys. Not at him. I don't follow, she said softly. I respond. That drew a raised eyebrow. But Lucas didn't reply. He began to play. The first notes of fracture and flow rang out sharp and precise. It was a modern composition, his own. Syncopated rhythms, odd time signatures, experimental key shifts. A song built to challenge. Lucas played confidently, his fingers racing across the high register, layering complex arpeggios with rhythmic stabs. He wasn't just performing. He was asserting. But then. Zoe joined in. She didn't mimic. She translated. Her left hand entered not as a follower, but as a foil complementing and grounding the sharp elegance of Lucas's part with rich, soulful chords. She didn't try to match his intensity. She anchored it. Balanced it. The notes danced. Clashed. Reconciled. Lucas's brow furrowed not in annoyance, but in disbelief. Her timing was flawless. Her harmony choices were unexpected, but right. So right it startled even him. Behind them, Derek had stopped talking. Sienna's rose glass was now forgotten in her hand. Even the technician adjusting the overhead spotlight had frozen in place, one hand on the dimmer. Zoe leaned into a diminished progression that flipped the mood of Lucas's bridge section entirely. He adjusted instinctively, surprised, challenged, even intrigued. They weren't just playing now. They were communicating. Each phrase was a dialogue. A push and pull. A battle and a dance. It wasn't what Lucas had expected. He had expected to dominate. To flaunt his superiority. To show a girl from the cleaning staff why people like him performed at galas while people like her scrubbed the floors. But she wasn't here to prove anything. She was here to play. And she was better than good. She was unforgettable. By the final section of the piece, the lines between their parts blurred entirely. Zoe led the transition into the last movement, altering the mood from triumphant to bittersweet with a simple minor inversion. Lucas followed, his hands echoing her, not guiding her. When the last chord hit, both of them paused with their fingers suspended. The silence that followed felt deafening. No one spoke. Then slowly Derek let out a low whistle. What the hell did we just watch? Sienna blinked several times, genuinely stunned. Nico, eyes wide, said only, that wasn't luck. Lucas turned to Zoe. Where did you learn that? She stood, her hands trembling slightly from adrenaline. Harlem. Age 4. On a piano missing 2 black keys. He studied her. For the first time since they met, he looked at her not as a janitor. Not as a novelty. But as an equal. Maybe even a threat. That was insane, he said. You improvised counterpoint to a piece you've never heard. I listened, she said. Lucas took a deep breath, rubbing the back of his neck. You ever think about playing again? Like, for real? Zoe let the question hang. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to walk away, her steps slow, deliberate. She had nothing left to prove. But behind her, Lucas called out once more, this time, softer, hey, what's your name? She stopped at the edge of the stage. Turned halfway. Zoe Williams. Then she disappeared behind the curtain, leaving a room full of stunned silence, 3 wealthy kids who didn't know whether to laugh or applaud, and 1 humbled piano prince who had just met his match and didn't see it coming. The last chord still hung faintly in the air when Zoe disappeared backstage. And yet, its echo wasn't confined to the strings of the Steinway. It had already begun rippling through the Wellington Grand. It started with a stagehand. Then a lighting technician. Then a catering manager who had wandered too close to the curtain at the wrong or perhaps the right time. A whisper began to float among them all, did you hear that? That girl, she's not just a janitor. Who is she? Lucas Belmont remained seated at the piano, staring at the keys, his mind whirling faster than his fingers ever had. His breathing was controlled, but his hands trembled with adrenaline, not from performance nerves, but from something deeper. Humility. He wasn't used to that. The gala hadn't even started, and already, the moment that would define the evening had happened. And he wasn't the one who caused it. In the ornate lobby, guests had begun arriving in earnest, cloaked in furs, tuxedos, and the quiet entitlement of generational wealth. Waiters glided through the crowd with champagne flutes. An aging senator posed beside a tech billionaire for photographers. Elegant string music floated softly from the foyer quartet. No one in that room knew what had just transpired on stage. Not yet. But word was seeping in. A young usher rushed over to the stage manager, eyes wide. I don't know who she is, he whispered breathlessly, but she outplayed him. Belmont. The Lucas Belmont. And they weren't even scheduled. The stage manager blinked, confused. Outplayed, what? Some girl from staff. She just sat at the Steinway and I swear, it was like, fireworks and heartbreak and thunder all at once. The man frowned, trying to process that a janitor had just hijacked his cleanly scheduled performance. But before he could respond, another voice chimed in. This time, from an older woman in a silver shawl who had wandered into the edge of the auditorium early to find her seat. That girl, she said softly, more to herself than to anyone. She plays like someone who's lived through something. She wiped the corner of her eye and added, I haven't heard anything that raw since. God, since Coltrane met Ravel. Backstage, Zoe moved quickly, hoping the shadows would swallow her. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She hadn't planned to play, certainly not in front of people like him, or in that theater, on that piano. But her fingers had remembered. Her soul had remembered. It was like a dam had cracked inside her, and everything she'd buried for years, every chord, every aching unresolved note had come flooding back. She reached the utility closet, yanked it open, and stepped inside. Closed the door. Leaned her back against the mop handles and tried to breathe. What did I just do? She whispered to herself. But the door didn't stay closed for long. A knock. Then another. She tensed. Then surprisingly a soft voice. Zoe? It's me. Lucas. She didn't respond. Can I talk to you for a second? Still no answer. Lucas sighed. Look, I didn't come here to gloat or mock. I came here because, that was one of the most powerful duets I've ever been a part of. He waited, still nothing. Then he added, more hesitantly, I was a jerk. I judged you. And I was wrong. You're not just talented, you're damn near brilliant. Zoe slowly opened the door. Lucas stood with his hands at his sides, no phone, no entourage, no arrogance. Just a young man stripped of his superiority, trying to make something right. You shouldn't be sweeping floors, he said. You should be headlining. Zoe stepped out into the hallway, her eyes guarded. It's not that simple, she said. People don't just get to play because they're good. They play because someone lets them. Because someone gives them a chance. Lucas looked down. Then let me be that someone. Zoe blinked. What are you saying? There's still one open slot in the gala performance schedule. It was supposed to be a solo encore, but I want you to take it. Play something. Anything. With me or without me. I'll talk to the stage director. Zoe's stomach turned. You don't even know who I am. Lucas met her eyes. You're Zoe Williams. And you just reminded me what music is supposed to feel like. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, from down the hallway, the voice of Ms. Dennison, the strict program director, echoed. Where is Mr. Belmont? We need you in pre-call warm-up. And has anyone seen the girl from maintenance, Zoe? Zoe's face dropped. Lucas turned to her. Wait. Dennison said Zoe Williams. Zoe nodded, reluctantly. Dennison's voice continued, I swear that name rings a bell. Wasn't there a child prodigy Zoe Williams from Harlem? Used to sweep the state competitions years ago. Lucas's jaw fell slightly open. That was you? Zoe looked down. A long time ago. Lucas took a step back, suddenly understanding the full gravity of who had just played beside him. Holy! You're that Zoe Williams. The one from the Juilliard pipeline, the one everyone thought disappeared. I didn't disappear, she said quietly. I just couldn't afford to keep being seen. The truth hung there raw and naked. And Lucas, for the first time in his privileged life, didn't have a witty response. Back in the theater, guests were beginning to settle in. But something was off. There was a low hum in the crowd, an energy that hadn't been planned. People were murmuring. Staff were whispering. Some had even pulled up phones, checking social media where an off-the-record clip from a backstage staffer had already leaked. Janitor girl stuns Lucas Belmont in rehearsal duet. 1,000 views. Then 10,000. By the time the MC stepped up to the podium, the audience was already buzzing. And when he announced, please welcome the young virtuoso, Lucas Belmont, to open tonight's Winter Crescendo Gala, the applause wasn't just polite, it was curious. Lucas walked out. Alone. Then paused at the microphone. Before I begin, he said, I need to tell you all something. Tonight was supposed to be about tradition. Prestige. Perfect performances for perfect people. But backstage, something unexpected happened. The crowd leaned in. Lucas continued. I met someone who reminded me why I play at all. Someone whose name you may have heard before, and who deserves to be heard again. He stepped aside. gestured toward the wings. "Please welcome Zoe Williams." The crowd turned. And Zoe stepped into the light slowly, cautiously. She no longer looked like a janitor. Not because her clothes had changed, but because the way she carried herself had. And as she took her seat at the piano once more, the theater, this world that had once shut its doors on her, fell completely silent. She laid her hands on the keys. And this time, she wasn't asking permission. For a moment, no one in the audience moved. The applause that had greeted Lucas Belmont's entrance had faded, replaced by something far more powerful: silence fueled by curiosity. Zoe Williams stood center stage, barely lit by a single spotlight. No introduction. No fanfare. Just a young black woman in a janitor's uniform, standing beside a $120,000 Steinway & Sons concert grand, at one of the most exclusive music galas in New York City. Some guests whispered. Others adjusted their pearl necklaces, clearly uncomfortable. One woman in the front row leaned over and muttered, "This has to be some kind of performance art." Another scoffed, "Where's her gown? Surely this is a joke." Lucas, standing just off to the side, gave Zoe a nod. A quiet nod. No words, because he knew words would only get in the way of what was about to happen. Zoe sat down slowly at the bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Her chest tightened, not from fear, but from something deeper. This time, it mattered. It wasn't a rehearsal, or a test, or a challenge. This was her moment. The one life had tried to steal. The one society had told her she'd never get back. She took a breath. Closed her eyes. And began. The first few notes were quiet, almost hesitant, like a whisper in a cathedral. Then came the chords, lush, deliberate, full of longing. She wasn't playing Mozart. She wasn't playing anything they expected. She was playing her own story. A piece she had written years ago, unfinished, tucked away in an old notebook. A melody that once poured from a broken upright piano in her grandmother's Harlem apartment, now resurrected on the grandest stage she'd ever touched. The room stilled. There was something ancient in the way she moved. Her left hand told the story of struggle, her right of resilience. She wasn't just playing music. She was testifying. She played with the precision of classical training and the soul of lived experience. Every run of notes was like a memory. Every pause like a held breath between past and present. The piece rose into a swell, bittersweet, powerful. Her fingers became blur. Her back straightened. And in that moment, Zoe no longer looked like a janitor. She looked like she belonged. The murmurs in the crowd died completely. Even the most skeptical faces, tight-lipped donors, skeptical critics, stone-faced executives had softened. Some leaned forward. Some blinked away tears they didn't know had welled up. A woman in her 60s reached for her husband's hand and squeezed it without looking away from the stage. The performance moved like waves, gentle, then crashing, then retreating back into silence. Zoe struck the final note and let it ring. Her hands remained on the keys for a second longer. 2. 3. She exhaled and stood up slowly. Still, not a sound. Not yet. Then someone clapped. A single clap. From the back. Then another. Then 10. Then the whole room. A standing ovation. But not the polite, "we're at a gala" kind. This was thunderous. Raw. Real. Dozens rose. Then hundreds. People clapped until their palms turned red. Until tears ran down cheeks. Until they had no choice but to surrender to what they'd just witnessed. Lucas clapped, two eyes wide with pride and disbelief. Zoe, standing in front of them all, didn't bow. She didn't smile. She just stood still, letting the sound wash over her like rain after a drought. And for the first time in years, she felt seen. Backstage, the organizers were in chaos. The event producer scrambled through papers. The stage director was on the phone with donors. Someone whispered that an executive from Horizon Records, the very label Lucas had signed with, was in attendance and had already requested Zoe's last name. The video clip of her duet with Lucas was now viral. Over 300,000 views. Climbing by the second. Hashtag Zoe Williams was trending on Twitter. Janitor to Genius read the first viral headline. "Who is Zoe Williams?" asked Rolling Stone's Instagram. And the comments? "Her hands are telling stories the world forgot to listen to. I haven't cried at a piano performance since Aretha. She doesn't play the piano. She commands it. Give her every record deal available. Now." Later that night, after the standing ovation had finally settled and the final bows had been taken, Zoe stood by herself in the alley behind the theater. The night was cold. Her breath fogged in the winter air. She needed the quiet. Inside, guests were still buzzing. Some were trying to meet her. Others were already speculating about her next performance. But out here, beneath the street lamp and the sound of passing taxis, she could finally breathe. Then the door creaked behind her. Lucas stepped out, his black coat over his arm, a look of humility still fresh in his eyes. He didn't speak at first. Just stood beside her. Then, softly, "You were extraordinary." Zoe looked at him. "Thank you," she said simply. "I meant what I said earlier," he added. "If you want it, we can make this your life again. I'll introduce you to my agent. To Horizon. To the people who can actually open doors." Zoe looked away. "I'm not sure I want to go back through those doors." Lucas nodded. "I get it. But this time, you'd walk in on your terms." Silence stretched between them. Then Zoe asked, "Why did you change your mind?" Lucas gave a quiet laugh. "Because you played circles around me. And because, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a performer. I felt like a musician again. You reminded me why I started. Why I fell in love with music in the first place." Zoe smiled faintly, her breath forming clouds in the cold. "Then maybe this was never about me proving I belonged," she said. "Maybe it was about reminding people what music's really for." Lucas nodded slowly. "To level the playing field. To tell the truth," Zoe corrected him. He smiled again. "So, what comes next?" Zoe looked up at the stars, her eyes calm but shining. "I don't know. But for the first time in a long time, I get to choose." And in the distance, a car horn echoed faintly through the city. But the only sound that mattered was the music still lingering in everyone's hearts. Weeks passed. Then a month. But the night of Zoe Williams' performance at the Wellington Grand never truly ended. Clips of her duet with Lucas Belmont became a digital storm, millions of views, countless reaction videos, musicians attempting to recreate the magic, and cultural critics dissecting every second of that 2-minute solo she performed alone on the Steinway. She didn't ask for fame. But fame came anyway. And with it, opportunity. Letters. Emails. Invitations. Scholarships suddenly reopened. Music schools who had rejected her in the past quietly reached out, reconsidering her application. Agents from labels who never returned her mother's calls when she was 13 were now leaving voicemails daily. But Zoe didn't rush to sign anything. She still woke early. Still helped her mother with groceries. Still walked the same streets in Harlem where pianos were just a dream behind second-hand glass windows. Yet something had shifted. People began to recognize her not for the mop she used to push, but for the melody that had once silenced a ballroom full of billionaires. One afternoon, Zoe visited her old middle school. They'd painted over the faded walls of the music room, but the piano was still there, dusty, forgotten, a few keys stuck. She sat down anyway. A few students peeked through the cracked door, kids who didn't know her, but knew the story. One brave girl walked in, maybe 10 years old, eyes wide with admiration. "You're the piano girl, right?" she asked softly. "The one who made the rich people cry?" Zoe smiled. "I guess I am. I want to learn," the girl whispered. "But, my dad says music's not gonna pay bills." Zoe leaned in. "It might not pay the bills at first. But it pays the soul every single time." She took the girl's hand and placed it on the keys. "Start here. Doesn't matter if it's perfect. Just play what you feel." A single note rang out. Then another. Zoe didn't need the spotlight. She had something better. A second chance. Meanwhile, Lucas Belmont had quietly stepped back from the center stage. He didn't quit music, but something in him had evolved. He declined solo interviews. Stopped posting curated videos of his rehearsals. And began talking openly about access, privilege, and the need to break down the golden gates of classical music. In one podcast that went viral, he said, "The most brilliant musician I've ever played with had no manager, no resume, and no stage gown. Just a mop, and more talent than this industry deserves." People listened. Because they saw what he saw. Not just a prodigy but a rebirth. On a rainy evening in April, Zoe received a letter with a gold emblem on the seal, the New York Symphony Fellowship offering a full mentorship program, studio space, and the chance to compose a full-length concert piece to premiere next winter. She placed the letter on her desk. Didn't answer right away. She wasn't running anymore. And she wasn't desperate for a yes. Because this time she got to choose. Whether she joined a label or taught in Harlem. Whether she returned to center stage or stayed in the background helping others rise. Zoe Williams was no longer forgotten. She was undeniable. Some people are born with grand pianos in their living rooms. Others have to find music between the noise of poverty, judgment, and survival. But brilliance doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't care about the size of your house, your skin color, or the title on your uniform. Zoe Williams was never discovered. She was always there. The world just finally learned to listen. So if you're out there working, dreaming, doubting, wondering if your voice matters, let this be your reminder, it does. And one day, it might be the only sound the world remembers. Did this story move you? Have you ever been underestimated? Or have you witnessed someone defy the odds through raw talent? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if it resonated with you. And don't forget to hit subscribe for more stories that uncover hidden greatness, one voice at a time. Because the world needs to hear stories like this. And maybe, it needs to hear yours, too.